education. A couple more sentences. I've known Ken and his wife Pravina since I can't remember when I was back at the University of Hong Kong. And
2006 is the answer.
Is that the answer, Ken? And then when I moved here, we managed to get Professor King here as a distinguished visiting professor, so he knows our campus well. You're in the presence of a giant who is one of the giants in the field of, I like to say, international education development, but Professor King's focus really is on aid policy, on skills development and so on. And he got into China pretty early, and that's what it says on one of these slides. So I'm going to stop there, Ken, because you have a large corpus to get through.
Well,
thank you. Sorry, can we welcome Ken? Thank you. He has been in Xi'an, and so I quickly nabbed him and brought him down here from Xi'an to...
It's very nice to meet you. In fact, I've met you all just very quickly, and it's nice to see that you're all what I would call left wing. Very good. Or if you're from that side, right wing. Because one of the problems we're going to talk about is there is a lot of right-wing critique of the Confucius Institutes. Right wing. So, let's carry on. I'll try and say very little about myself. I'm going to say one or two words about my background. I'm going to say that it's quite important to look at the role of this difficult word. See if you know what it is. Serendipity or chance in your professional development. I know some of you are doing EdDs, others of you are just checking, and one of you is a teacher. We're going to look at these CIs, and it's very nice that 2 or 3 of you are in universities which have CIs. You know, you're one, 4 CIs in different parts of the world. So we've got people here who know about some of what we're talking about. I'm going to get you to think about some research possibilities for CIs in cases of interest, and then we're going to look at geopolitics of CIs. I was lucky to come here, as Mark said, in March 2006, because 2 or 3 weeks earlier, China had launched its Africa paper, African policy. So I thought, oh, why don't I get interested in analyzing what China is doing in education, because I'm a professor of education. What is China doing in soft power in Africa? So I pursued that. And you can see the kind of, it's quite important to look at the language. Those of you who are looking at language, it's quite, by the way, you can get this PowerPoint from Emily if you want the whole thing afterwards, without having to spend time writing it down. It's available. And there's some articles also at the end. If you want, you can write to me or to one of my colleagues and get them. Longer things. So, I know that you're interested in language, 1 or 2 of you. So it's quite good to look at the language that China uses to describe what it's doing with CIs and with education. I did a book on this stuff, luckily, because of coming to Hong Kong. So by chance, I got into looking at China and Africa. The slide with the picture of my book doesn't come out. That's very lucky. It's also got it's also in Chinese. So Emily might be able to send you it when she sends you the PowerPoint. The thing will be there. I'm talking about the importance of chance also in our academic lives, thinking about Mark's and Emily's and yourselves. So quite a few things have happened to me by chance, but they've been very important. Like how I studied Greek and Latin instead of studying Chinese. It would have been good if I'd studied Chinese. I'd have been maybe able to write a book on China and speak Chinese if I hadn't done Greek and Latin in Cambridge. So I did my PhD completely by chance, finding the topic. Similarly, later on, And even coming to Hong Kong was by chance, because my first PhD student was somebody whose name you may know, Mark Bray. Not this one, but Mark Bray, who's a very well-known scholar in Hong Kong. We might ask you, if we've got time at the end, how has chance played any role in your own academic journey? Serendipity or chance? So when I started looking at the CIs, I'm going to call them CIs, it's shorter. When I started looking at them, it was clear that they were not the same as the British Council, or the Alliance Française, or the German equivalents, many other bodies like them, but they're different. They're responsive to requests from outside, and they are inside universities. The great majority are in universities, like the booklet I put round is Edinburgh University. It's right inside the university, the CI. Same with the other universities, including the ones that you know you're connected to. In our case, and every CI overseas has got a Chinese partner. So in Edinburgh, our partner is Fudan in Shanghai. A very good, high-quality university. So it's very good for us to have links with Fudan. There isn't a single model. I'm going to show you how different, how many different flowers there are of CIs. This Liu Yandong is no longer state councillor, but I think it's quite nice what she said there. Just read it. Basically, she's saying there's no single model. Many different CIs. The ones linked to your university are probably different. Each of the four are probably different. Different USA and Africa, whatever. This is the woman, Shulin, who used to run the CIs until about 5 years ago. And what I think she says there is quite interesting. Because of criticism of CIs, but she says, you know, they're not ideological. You can't call them Mao Zedong institutes. Edinburgh would be very annoyed if you said, oh, it's a Mao Zedong institute, a Mao institute. We would be very upset if you called our CI that. And I think it's quite important to look at America's soft power versus China's. That's what Shulin said at the bottom. She's right. One major Hollywood movie is much more influential than 70 or 100 CIs. In terms of impact, soft power. So I think Shulin is probably correct about that. This is a well-known scholar of China, Africa, He Wenping, in Chinese Academy. And she comments on how China's hard power, Belt and Road, is, you know, is very, very obvious in the world. But she thinks there's a lot more work to be done on soft power. And if you look at the last conference of BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, you can see that they're saying BRI connectivity must be improved, not just building hard power, but the soft power side of Belt and Road Initiative. But anyway, I would say that since 2004, when this CI process was started, and by the way, in schools, they're called Confucius Classrooms. There's a large number of Confucius Classrooms. I guess it's the largest language project the world has ever seen. We could discuss that. I'm not sure. I think it probably is. In Edinburgh, we've got a right in the university. Very fine building. A lot of support for scholarships coming to China. It's called the CI for Scotland. And notice we've got 31 CIs in the UK. We're going to talk later about some of the politicians who are trying to close them, but so far, we're safe. I'm not sure how influential the CI is, but I would say that you would never have guessed that we have 8,000 Chinese students. 8,000, not 800, not a mistake. Not 80, we've got 8,000 Chinese students. Those are much more influential than one CI. Now, just an example, if you take Africa, there are 63 CIs in Africa. The majority are in his country. South Africa, 7. There are 7 CIs. One was just initiated at the time of the BRICS meeting earlier this year by the President of China. There is one in my old university. Ravina and I used to be in Kenya, and I used to teach at the University of Nairobi. The first CI in Africa is in Nairobi University. And if you want to compare, one or two, if you're interested in comparative education, look at the comparison between the number of CIs in Africa and the number of British Council, German institutes. It's quite a big, in such a short time. Now, one of the differences between these new CIs in places like Africa and the older countries in Europe is that some of the universities in Europe already had Chinese studies. By contrast, the CIs have introduced Chinese to, including whole BAs. You can do a BA in Chinese in Nairobi University. Okay, there's lots of specialist CIs. I reckon there's between 12 and 20 different specialist CIs. For example, agriculture in 3 different countries. My wife and I have visited the Kenya agricultural CI, very different from a CI in other parts of Africa. Another CI in Kenya, in Moi University, the textile CI linked to a textile factory. So, and then one of you was in Oxford, at the back, our teacher friend. Well, in Oxford, there's a different university than Oxford called Oxford Brookes. It's got a publishing CI, and it has a link, as you can see, always a link, a partnership with Beijing Foreign Studies University. Beijing Foreign Studies University, masses of connections. So it does a lot of courses. I don't think there is yet an AI CI. Yeah, you know, AI, artificial intelligence. I don't think there's one of those yet, but or a chat GPT CI. I don't think that exists yet. But one of the most popular specialisms is traditional medicine. There are lots of them around the world, from Brazil to Japan, and also in South Africa. There's one in the University of Western Cape, which Mark knows well. So medical CIs linked to traditional medicine partners in China. And going back to London, you probably don't think of, you think of CIs as doing language, but look, this one is focusing on dance and music. And is linked not to Beijing Normal, but to Beijing Dance Academy. See, so there's the same with, look at the music one in Denmark. It's linked to the Royal Danish Academy of Music. And the partner, again, is not a university in China, but Conservatory of Music. Obviously, there are business CIs. We've got them in London. We've got them in, even in Edinburgh, there's a whole range of business language. So not just learning Chinese, but business Chinese. You know, how to talk up. And finally, illustrating different kinds of CIs. we've actually got one in Britain's famous Open University. Just started last year, an Open University CI, online. And that's also linked. I think Beijing Foreign Studies University has links to no less than 23 overseas universities. Now, you can see how that is going to internationalize the staff and the students through opportunities, many different. Oh, I've forgotten, there's a few which you see have closed. Opera, martial arts, international finance. But there's about 50 which are called model CIs. These are ones which the organization which runs the CIs has decided are very good illustrations of quality and impact. And then there's a lot of regular CI. Altogether there's about 450 CIs. 450. There's a question for you. There is, surprisingly, and most people in Hong Kong don't know this, I'm not even sure if you know this, there's a CI in Hong Kong. But it's quite unusual. It's in Poly-U. I've been there. Not this time. But it's still existing. But it has no partner. Nope. So it's quite, it would be an interesting research topic to go and see what's it doing. Who is it teaching? Maybe it's teaching Goutonnois to Hong Kongers. You know, because Cantonese is in not a very strong position nowadays. You know, so maybe I don't know. It's an interesting topic for a master's degree, perhaps. Now, I'm suggesting that there are some research questions to be raised about. See, I'm trying to write a paper myself, but there are some research questions to be raised. If you think about what I'm calling the geopolitics of CIs, they're not just the CIs, like universities, including this university, are influenced by the wider politics of Hong Kong and of China. And the same is true of India. Look at India. My wife comes from India, by the way, so if you've any questions about CIs in India, Mrs. King is one of the few experts on the single, she's actually been there, there's only one CI in India, but there's only 1.3 million people in India. Not bad, isn't it? One CI and 1.3 billion. 1.3 billion people. So you have to ask the question, that must be doing with politics, isn't it? Surely. And by the way, the Chinese director was not offered a visa by the Indian government. So it's only half a CI. Because all the CIs have a Chinese director and, say, a British director or a Kenyan director or a South African director. That's what makes them different from British Council. British Council has a British director. Alliance Française has one director, French. But what is surprising and interesting about the CIs, they've got two joint directors. Very good idea, by the way. Make them much more accessible. What about CIs in Japan? Again, a question to be asked. Can't be by chance that there are no CIs in national universities, only in private. There must be a research could be done on that. Why is that? CIs in the Middle East? I just did some research this morning because I thought there might be questions about Israel and Palestine and Lebanon and Jordan. There are two CIs in Israel. One is in Tel Aviv, and one is in the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And there are two CIs in Jordan, and there's one CI in Lebanon, and of course several CIs Egypt. So the CIs are, and if you're interested in war, there are 6 CIs in Ukraine. I expect they were in Odessa, Lviv, and Kiev, rather than in the east. And I think, I can't remember how many there are in Russia. There's about 17 CIs in Russia. So there are some interesting questions to be raised about the where the CIs are and why we hear so much about the CIs in USA and so little about the CIs in other parts of the world like Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia. Here are some other questions that in what we might call the international relations side of CIs. This is a huge network. I said it's the largest language project in the world. There's 1,000 Confucius Classrooms, including some in Scotland, in England, and USA, 1,000. These are actually in primary and in secondary schools. And again, each of those 1,000 has a partner school or institution in China. So the kids from this school in Scotland can visit China. Very attractive to be able to do that. So what I've been suggesting in that second paragraph is that you have a kind of network for internationalization of teachers in China and volunteers through these 1,500 institutions. You don't have a Peace Corps like USA, and you don't have a sort of volunteer network like Japan, the JOCV, Japanese Overseas Cooperation Volunteers, JOCV. You don't have that in China, but in a way, perhaps you can regard this CI process as sending thousands of young people to the developing world? No, not only there. What's different between this process and what the Peace Corps? The Peace Corps only go south. They don't go to Scotland. Maybe they should, because we need some help as well. In Scotland, we're short of expertise. So these volunteer organizations go to developing countries. The CI goes north and south. Of course, that's like the British Council. British Council, north and south. What are the relationships between these thousands of volunteers and teachers and the thousands of Chinese students? I think my own view is nobody's done the research on that. Nobody has asked, what's the connection between the 8,000 students we have in Edinburgh from China and the CI? Those 8,000 students are not teaching in the CI. They've got their own teachers from Fudan. But is there any relationship? By the way, see, most of you are mainlanders, aren't you? No HK student here, Emily. You're an HK honorary representative in this. And Mark Bray, he's been here for years. He's an honorary HKer. But we only have mainlanders here because the CI, apart from PolyU, the CI is a mainland phenomenon. I don't know, by the way, I've never asked the question, but I'm asking it now. Is there a CI in Taiwan? My guess is no, but you know. So can somebody from Hong Kong apply to be a volunteer in a CI? I don't know the answer to that. I suspect you have to be a student from a university like yours, which has 4 CIs, or like Zhejiang Normal we were talking about, which has got 5 or 6 CIs in different parts of the world. Then you get a chance to go. So I see the CIs as a part of a process of internationalizing the student experience for Chinese. You know? Okay, we've talked in these first 19 slides about the vision and the ambition, diversity, creativity of the CIs. But the next few slides before we end, and then take some questions, we'll look at some of the bias and fake news and disinformation side of the CIs, both in Europe and particularly in the USA, because a lot of that happened during this fake president called Trump. Do you call him a fake president? I think he was a fake. He was always talking about fake news, but he was a fake president, in my view. I've told you already, there's very few controversies in the rest of the world. All the controversies about CIs are in Europe and in North America, a little bit in Canada. If you've got access to Wikipedia, which is a very useful source, you might want to look at the, I'll give you the link at the end of this, look at the criticism of Confucius Institutes. It's one of the longest articles in their Wikipedia. It's about 20 pages of criticism of the CIs. You don't get that about the British Council or Alliance Française. Here, there's a research question. How come? Why is there so much criticism of the CIs? I was doing a seminar recently with a colleague from a historically black university who's just done a PhD on Kenya. And one of the chapters is on the CI in Nairobi University. And what she's saying is that social media is very good. There's a good side of social media. My wife and I don't use social media, except when I want to get in touch with 2 of our grandchildren, I use Snapchat. Not many people of my age know how to do Snapchat, but the only way to get in touch with our two of our grandchildren is by Snapchat. She doesn't read emails, our granddaughter or grandson, no chance. So, but you know, this social media is very important for understanding what's happened to the CIs. You may have heard that Cambridge Analytica, which is not a Cambridge college, by the way, it's an enterprise which has been closed down, but it used to offer to fix your elections. They did. They offered to help you fix elections, including in Kenya and several other countries. We pay Cambridge, a scandal actually, to help you fix your elections. And they helped to fix the referendum on whether we should stay in the EU. And Cambridge Analytica got hold of several million Facebook accounts illegally, and they targeted millions of people with messages were fake news about how 62 million Turkish people were going to come to the UK, and a whole lot of other stuff. And I think that was one of the reasons why we lost the vote. So there's an example of what can happen in a so-called democratic country. Fake news is why we are no longer in the EU. It's also, of course, to do with Rupert Murdoch and the newspapers. So I'd like you we're going to spend another 5 minutes on the US, because one of you has got links with one of your 4 CIs is actually in the southern states. It's closed, called Troy, which You both know about it. So Troy is closed down. So look at the numbers. A few years ago, before Trump, there were 110 CIs in the USA. The largest number of any country in the world. So China, USA, very close. Remember I told you 63 in the whole of Africa, 54 countries, 110 in one country. So China was offering the Chinese language, particularly to the USA, you could say. And then we have the National Defense Authorization Act, which says you've got to choose taking Chinese money or access to federal funds. Well, that's a no-brainer. Most universities in the States, which are tall, big universities, get a massive amount of money from federal government. So it's a no-brainer. You get 100,000 US from China versus several millions of dollars from the federal. So it's impossible to see how many universities, a handful, liberal arts colleges were not getting federal funds, so they continued. The majority closed down. So that's what happened. It was easier to remove the Chinese money and continue to get federal money. So that was promoted by during the Trump time. We have a parallel in the UK. Both our Prime Minister, Sunak, who was not elected, by the way, we don't elect all of our, we're a democratic country, we don't elect people. A few people in the Conservative Party elected our Prime Minister. And he's already talking about using Taiwanese teachers instead of mainland teachers. And if you look at our university, we get 0.04% of our money from China for the CI. And you can work out how much money we get from 8,000 students on fees. You have to ask yourself the question, several of our, we had a Prime Minister called Truss. She was Prime Minister for 40 days. She was also keen to close down the Confucius Institutes. And she's actually made a trip to Taiwan after being pushed out of being Prime Minister. You can see what kind of person she is. So you might want to ask yourself the question, we've got about 20 minutes when we stop. What lies behind the attack on CIs in the US and UK? Is it something that the CIs are doing wrong? Is it some politics they're promoting, or what's the reason that they're being criticized? So they did an investigation of the CIs in the USA by the Government Accountability Office, and they found that they were unable to find any evidence of spying or impact on academic freedom. And yet, the CIs are still closed. So I asked the question at the end there, is the real issue not the CI and what the curriculum of the CI? The curriculum of the CI is teaching Chinese and Chinese culture, etc. Arguably, the problem is the anti-China feelings, which are very widespread in certain parts of the West, particularly in USA. Those feelings preceded Trump. The phrase yellow peril was used many decades before Trump. Yellow peril, that's you guys. And it used to be used for Japan, but then it got transferred to be used about China. Because China is a threat economically to the... What's the reason for the critique of China? Apparently it lacks the centuries-old democratic traditions of USA and UK. I'm not sure about our democratic traditions, by the way. They seem a bit shaky. Quite a few of our premiers in the last few years have not been elected. We've been elected by some of the Conservative Party members, maybe 100,000 people. We have 63 million people, 60% of which are voting age. So leaving aside the democracy of what happened in February 2020, the attack on the Capitol, I wonder if some of this stuff in the second paragraph is the reason why the CIs are not. Trump's talk about Trump initiating the China war and talking about the China virus, you know, from Wuhan, and those helped to create a, you know, an atmosphere in which you close down Chinese institutions. But it is pretty extraordinary to me that somebody who most of us regard as, you know, not very highly, to put it nicely, how could... Huh? Contemptible, there's a nice word. How could somebody who is as stupid or contemptible as Trump, how could he have been able to whip up this anti-China feeling? It's continued a little bit with Biden, but he's coming round to the idea that he might meet with President Xi in November. And the right wing, the extreme right wing, a handful of people in the what's called the China Research Group of the Conservative members of Parliament. The China Research Group is about 10 or 11 people, but they're the people behind Taiwanese teachers for UK. Those are the people who are criticizing CIs. I'm asking you the question here. We'll come back to it if we do a bit of discussion. What can we, as critical students and teachers, do about this? If you want to do some further reading, these are some things that you could look at. A couple of them from a colleague who is in Xi'an Northwest University, but I've given you his email there. If you're interested, he will be able to send you that. And I've written some stuff also. And if you want to look at the Wikipedia article, that's the link to it. Now, that's all I'm going to say on this, but it might be quite good to get you to, we'll go back one slide. We might ask you to spend, we've got 16 minutes until 3 o'clock. I might ask you to talk to your next door neighbor. You two, fortunately we've got 222, and Rowena can talk to Mark. We've got to use these people, you know, people sitting doing nothing. Talk to your neighbor about what is actually driving this. What's going on here? 100 CIs closed in the US. Planning to close some of the ones in the UK. 1 or 2 have already closed in Sweden and 1 or 2 other countries. So just talk for, I'll give you 4 minutes, and then we'll see what questions you have and what comments you have. What's going on here? Why is there this criticism? What lies behind this? There were some other questions. Is that the question? Ask yourself, what lies behind this attack? Okay, so 5 minutes. I'm going to listen to you talking. I'll talk to Emily. Emily?
Hi.